Welcome to this Swishoes podcast, an edited recording of a forum discussion on authority. If you'd like to take part, join us by subscribing to swishoes.com. Now let's go straight in and join the panelists, where Nadia is kicking off the discussion.
I was digging a little bit into the subject, and I want to start on a higher level. So afterwards, we dig down to bosses and personal experiences. But actually, authority is something very necessary and normal in the society because it keeps society stable, coordinated, and ready for action. Of course, authority is not only within a company, but within society, in politics, and so on. But it must be legitimate, it must be accountable, and it must be limited. And these are the three things that make authority good. Because without one of the three, it could go into tyranny or some other exaggerated form of authority that nobody likes. This is the hard part, how to keep coordination and order. And this is really about abiding the law and groups that, actually watch for it. And so I'm talking in general society. But the same is true in companies, if you think about it, because any type of gathering of people needs to have a structure and a system. Legitimacy is very important versus raw power because it could be effective or not really effective, but suppressive. Decision-making and resource management is as well very, very important because that's where accountability and limits come. And the 4I principle is very important to keep authority in check.
How do you keep authority in check? And we could be talking about an individual or a policeman.
Maybe we talk personally, but there are checks and balances in every society. How they work and are they enforced is another thing. But that's why you have segregation of power. And that's why you have one overwatching the other, so nobody gets the whole power.
Yeah. Like
anyhow, I'll stop here because we have many more to join.
Amelia, you wanted to come in?
Yes, and thank you, Nadia. Hello to everyone, of course. Thank you for sharing this, and that you have also searched it. I haven't searched it, right? It comes from what we know if we start from the basis of our everyday lives. So I was also wanted to comment that it's about the frames that we have as a society. Funnily enough, if we move one step backwards, we'll have to say and question who has decided those frames. We have done it. So someone with authority or some people with authority decided to create those frames, and those frames are developed based on our times, right? This is how I see it. It's not the same back to ancient Greece with democracy. It's not exactly the same today. But for sure, if we start with authority and then we move ahead with frames, and then this is how we keep it, I wrote here, legitimate, accountable, and limited. At the same time, we need to consider how we develop it and how we avoid having authority being a menace to society or being something bad for us.
What are frames, Amelia?
At the moment, we have our legal frames, but as humans, we do have the frames that we have been instilled on while we were growing up. For example, you should do no harm to the other, right? You should be a nice neighbor. Commenting about everyday life.
Gotcha.
And examples.
So there are rules or constraints or customs or culture.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
And then we as humans, we know that we are meant to be with other people, right? We are not supposed to be alone. And this is how we move ahead as a society. But again, these are the frames that each one of us has grown up with, those frames that have been from the society and from legal perspective and from the family.
Yeah. Interesting that we've started off talking about limits to authority. Not the direction I'd expected it to go in, but that's fascinating. That's good. Marianne wanted to come in.
Yes. So you were asking, right, how to keep authority in check. Obviously in a company, a well-functioning company, you have your performance reviews and the 360 evaluations, etc. And I think that is really the platform for keeping the authority in check, because authority is hand in hand really with credibility and having a responsible and professional knowledge, etc., and doing the right thing, and these are the platform, having these yearly performance reviews, as well as which part of it is really assessing you as a manager, as an authority figure, not only the results that you're driving and the results that you are achieving, the way you keep authority in check.
Can I ask here, are performance reviews enough to control, to check? I will not say, maybe control is a bit more extreme, but to control that authority is not overused or is not used as a tool?
But again, that's a really, really valid question, right? Because I think, really well-established companies have various ways, either a direct way of, reporting if, abuse of power, etc., having these whistleblower channels, as well as obviously you can have really good networks, as well as, HR that could be reached out to if something like that happens, when there is a need to check and control.
I think it can also be prevented when you are choosing new candidates, at least, or bringing to higher positions people that have the skills that match to not an authoritative character, right? When you have people who have higher emotional intelligence, for example, people who are really listening and approaching their teams, and these people can move ahead, or you can bring them into a company with a culture that you want, but having less authoritative figures, where, not to be misunderstood, sometimes authority, if we don't say authority, but decision making is not exactly the same, right? Because sometimes some people in high positions need to make decisions that are hard or harsh, and they do have the authority to do so and the approval, but it doesn't mean that the authority should just step on other people or misused.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, agree.
Lily?
So I just would like to generalize what is discussed, because Bill, you mentioned personal authority. I consider definition like this as leadership, and I think it's very connected to hierarchical authority, because authority is usually given, if you consider it in society, in the company. And leadership or personal authority, as you mentioned, it's something taken, deserved, something which occurs like in relationship with others. And the problem is that oftentimes the people, I mean, not only in the companies, politicians, they are given authority, but they do not have or haven't developed yet the leadership, and it impacts the performance, which is possible to check. I agree with every methodologies which were mentioned. And in terms of interaction between like team and the boss, because you were asking this question, I think what helps, let's say, specialist or manager to deal with the boss who is not right or misusing their authority is leadership or personal authority of this manager or specialist. And in such a way, they are both developing their leadership skills, if both are open to this. This is a very interesting topic. It's just that authority now is often misused in the negative aspect, because, as I said, many people are given it without leadership. But in fact, I do agree with everyone that we need it, because we need some system structure.
I was surprised that we started talking about check on authority rather than how to develop it. If anyone would like to develop, why do we need checks on authority? And also, Lily's introducing the idea of leadership. And I'm wondering if leadership is the transition of rules-based hierarchic authority into personal authority, and that abuse is most likely with rules-based, and that once it becomes leadership and personal, it may be more likely to be accepted? Sorry, I'm just speculating. Fiona.
I was agreeing with Lily on the link between authority and leadership. That's an aspect. And I'm thinking just on a work or organizational authority. The one word that just resonated with me was respect. So while we may inherit authority by our promotion to a job, the longevity or sustainability is built on respect. And so the example you'd given earlier with the sea captain, his respect was initially warranted through his position and his uniform. However, what continued, or how his authority will continue, is through the respect that the community has for him, whether that be in the work setting or otherwise. Thinking more of the long view, for me, it comes back to how you earn respect and how you demonstrate throughout your life.
Marianne?
Excuse me, just for one point. I think you're absolutely right, Fiona. But in this case, the sea captain earned his own authority. And I don't think you're given an authority, yeah? Just like that, blindly given authority. I think mostly in companies, people do earn the authority, through the ranks and through times and years of service, through credibility, respect, as they have achieved, and therefore, they are going up in the ranks.
I agree, Marianne, with what you're saying. If you think about the sea captain, yes, he went through the ranks in the Navy or equivalent. In the workplace, often we move between locations, between employers. So you're given that authority when you join as a chief, and then your sustainability or longevity and success is earned through the demonstration, and then the trust and respect there as well. And it's a combination of how you carry yourself as a leader. So coming back to Lily, it could be what you're wearing, how you present yourself, how you walk into a room, everything. Eyes are on you because you've gained that authority. People may know you from the history, or you may be meeting them for the first time. And it's how you cultivate that. But I'm also, to tag back to what Bill was saying earlier on, I did find it interesting that we went to the 4 Eyes principle from Nadia at the beginning and the checks on authority. So that was an interesting thing. I was more thinking about how you continue to develop and maintain a good authority going forward.
You've raised this question of how you develop authority and how complex it is. And Nadia, you had your hand up.
I actually want to live in the world that Marianne described just a minute ago. That's the ideal, but I've never seen it out there. Because normally the CEO is somebody that you don't know, that is selected from another company, coming for a short time, and it's given an authority. And that's why I continue my argument that because there is a risk for abuse and corruption when you have authority, the checks and balances are very important. And for us to be sure that this authority is not going to be abused, we need to be in a structure or in a company where the checks and balances are very transparent, very visible, and everybody is accountable for their actions. Only this could keep people honest. And the other thing is, don't keep them too long in power, because power corrupts, as we know. It could be the best guy as a middle manager and as a higher manager, but when it goes to the top, it may just turn its values the other way around. So, I wish things were simple, but unfortunately, human nature has proven it not to be.
Yeah,
So,
well, it's quite hard in a company, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, Lily, got your hand up.
I do agree with everyone, and especially with last statement of Nadia, because if everything was ideal and people had only deserved promotions, we wouldn't discuss misused authority now, but we started from this. It means that everyone has experienced situation or has seen how authority was misused. And here coming back to how it's gained authority and leadership, a lot of people mentioned respect, and this is a must, I agree, but authority is given sometimes initially when the person is not known, not because there is no respect yet, because you can know person a little bit but already feel respect because of nice suit, uniform or something like this, because it impacts opinion. But what is important here is trust. I think so. I do agree that respect should be earned, but also the trust, it's a must for given authority to grow into personal authority / leadership.
Amelia?
I have been listening to all this time and I agree, but we make authority sound like it's a personal issue. And I think it's not exactly, it's not dependent on, it is dependent on how we use it, but it's not dependent on the people, but it's dependent on the position. So as I see it, when we vote for our government, we vote whom we want to be accountable and responsible to make decisions for us. So they have the authority to do so because this position, the people who represent us, has this authority. So it is like what we read about the Navy article that you sent us, Bill, earlier today. So if you misuse it or not, it's under discussion. And if we want to check the authority, then we need to check the authority that goes with this position, and then this position, how this position should be checked, evaluated, and moving ahead. Now, giving feedback to people and in our organizations, performing reviews and everything else, it helps understand how the person who is in that position uses the authority given by this position. But before we go into the authority, we need to consider the people who get the accountability and the responsibility for the people under them. So I hope I have make my idea more clear now, because I believe authority goes with a position, and accountability and responsibility goes with the position, but with the person who moves along on the path of going to the leadership role, CEO role, or whatever role.
Gemma's had her hand up for a while.
Yeah, no, basically I wanted to mention that what I can hear from the conversation, and also when I think about authority, is a service, because the person is doing a service per se. This service has to, or this person, this entity has to be integral, and you have to trust that so that you follow. And sometimes will be elected, and as Marianne was saying, like earned, and sometimes it just might be imposed, as it might happen in a football team. So at the end of the day, I think that it's once you have somebody as with the authority, it's also about you. Do you recognize this entity as authority and as a leader that you want to follow, or would you do your workaround to get your own way?
What happens when you're in a meeting and you say, who's going to chair this meeting? You do hand over a lot of authority to someone in that situation. When do you decide you've made a mistake and want to take it back, and how do you take it back?
This is what I wanted to mention for a while, but we were discussing a bit different angles, that we haven't discussed authority from another positive perspective, that it's needed because people are comfortable to have someone responsible. It's from political perspective and also in the companies, because it's easy to complain about the boss that he or she doesn't understand, doesn't accept ideas, but at the end of the day, higher roles have higher responsibility, and in case of some failures or mistakes, unpleasant discussions with top management, and in these situations people prefer to have the person in authority to take care of this. Authority is like other general definitions. People complain about some aspects, but they also do appreciate some of them.
People are herd animals. Just like in the animal world, you always have one alpha. But who is the alpha in the animal world? This is the toughest, normally the most enduring of the species. While in the human society, this is the problem, that the toughest doesn't work. It has to be a person with some personal qualities. And that's why policy in such an era today, because the wrong people are in authority. And the question is, how do we put quality people who have high values and who have high sense of responsibility and service to others in order to perceive authority as something admired by everyone? And this is the hardest part. And that's where the CEOs fails as well. And, the department heads, because once they become, something, a position of authority, not every one of them is mature enough or has the wisdom to be the leader. They think they are the leader, but they're actually not, because this article with, the Navy general was perfect. The fact that you have the uniform doesn't make you the leader. They follow you because they depend on you. And once you take off the uniform, will they follow you? And this is the big question.
Right. We've got a couple of interesting themes here. We've also got Pramod, Amelia, and Marianne wanting to have a word. Pramod, and then Amelia, and then Marianne.
I just wanted to really go back to what Lily was saying. According to me, from my experience and work, authority, the way I see it is basically kind of risk. Who owns the risk if something fails? Who is responsible? Whose name will come in the postmortem report? That person basically ends up being the authority. So if you look at it from that angle, so you have that very often this person is a formally designated person. So he cannot hand it over to someone else because, like the captain in the ship example, right? He cannot hand over the responsibility to someone else. So that's the formal ownership. There is the informal influencing part that there are some leaders are very good at influencing. So that also goes into some leaders who have the formal authority. Also, who's good at influencing becomes even more of an authority. And the third thing is how much liability this person has. Very often that's the excuse used for the huge salaries given to CEOs, right? Oh, this person is ultimately responsible for the failure of the company. If everything fails, this person is responsible. That's why we have to give him $100 million or whatever is the big number, right? So for me, the authority is it's not just somebody having it. It's about who takes the risk very often and how much then he or she can influence.
That's a fascinating one because there's an implication in there, isn't there, that whoever is willing to take the risk or accept the consequences of failure as well as success is automatically the authority figure. That's an interesting aspect of authority. Thanks for raising it, Pramod. Amelia?
Yes, again, we come back to accountability, right? And to responsibility. I would like to comment three things just on all those topics. First of all, what Lily mentioned. Yes, of course, there are people that really want an authoritative person to take responsibility. Maybe they feel psychologically safe when they have someone making decisions, right? Empowering other people. So this is also the characteristics of a good leader anyway, giving also the right example. But then going to Nadia's input, and then it's very interesting that you mentioned we always wanted to have an alpha person, and that's why we no longer have alpha. We have beta, we have gamma, we have all these types, and probably the problem with authority is still when we have alpha people on there and not other types that have the best of alpha, the best of beta, the best of gamma, and all the rest. That's how I see it, without wanting to be biased or anything else, if we say this person is like that or the other person. And just to steer the pot, and then I stop, Bill, it's very interesting that today we were 10 people, right? We lost one on the way.
She did say she was going to leave.
Yeah, and there are 3 men and 7 women. I think this also shows how much more open, again, without bias, but how eventually we see that women are a bit more open to such discussions, to develop also themselves and being more fluid when it comes to approaching other people and not just being super authoritative in their handling. Just steering the pot. I don't want to cause any blacks and whites to bring here, but it's an assumption. We are a small community here, and out of 10, we are 3 and 7. And I stop here.
Well, I'll go to Marianne, but before you go on, I'm going to recognize the gender bias within Swissues as a forum for people speaking philosophically, but generally going outside their area of their job, beyond their operational responsibilities, being able to talk about relationships with family, with society, and as well as within their companies, and to talk about personal development. The bias within Swissues is very much towards women. I don't know why.
It is the nature of women.
Okay, well, yes, but
it is in every. First, women have not been heard for centuries and centuries due to religious and other reasons. But women are really bringing the tribe together, the family together, everybody together, and this shows in every bunch of people that you observe here in Swiss youth as well. But if you look at other forums, whatever, is the same thing. Anyhow, sorry, Marianne.
No, not at all. I mean, it's super interesting, the different conversations. But actually, I would like to go back to Nadia's point earlier when she sort of talked about the, authority, having leadership skills and having the right leaders in authority positions. And I think traditionally we're thinking about leaders having sort of authoritative styles and top-down approach and having sort of clear visions and my way and this is what we're doing, sort of clear directions basically. And I think now, or at least in the past few years, I think that narrative is already shifting towards more sort of on the service leadership style. And I think, the conversation is quite interesting. What works best? What kind of style and what sort of leader in what sort of situation, wherever the company is, which, leadership style would work best in that authority position? And I think that's what is very key also to understand. When, for example, this gentleman who was, in the military and as a sea captain or I think that requires a different type of leadership style, where it could be, life and death situation, etc., versus maybe leading a company, a smaller company, where more empathetic and sort of, softer approach is preferred.
The theory says that the good leader is the one that can use as many styles depending on the situation. Because, for example, if you have a force majeure and something happens, like, for example, COVID, nobody knew COVID would happen.
Yes.
I observed within some of our suppliers how people reacted to it. And the ones that were really decisive and immediately did something about it won the game, because this is such a situation. That doesn't work every time, of course. But what I'm saying is that a good leader has the intuition when or what style to use at what situation and to be able to use it, of course.
But leader is meaning authority? It's implying authority?
Not necessarily. I mean, person with responsibility and accountability. It doesn't have to be, completely on the top. But if you're accountable and responsible for something, you should use your styles of leadership accordingly.
There's an interesting point about situational leadership, where you change your style according to the circumstances. That's a really interesting one to bring up. And Gemma's got her hand up.
Because actually, and that's a very good point in the situational leadership, no one size fits all, right? And that's, I think, what's magic, if you want to put, of the leader, of the authority, is to acknowledge and recognize how can I maximize the potential of the team by using different tools. And there's no only one recipe. I think that there's also experience, not only intuition, but I think that there's experience and work behind.
In this situational leadership thing, is there instruction or is it just experience? How do you switch from one style to another without confusing people and beginning to look confused yourself and having people wonder quite what's up? Lily, you got your hand up, and then Emilia.
Yes, I wanted to comment on that because my company sent me to this situational leadership training several years ago. I think it's a must do for the person, not only limited to this training, to a lot of trainings and open-mindedness in general, but in principle, based on what I've learned, it was 1 week training and it was about 12 hours per day. Their target was to work in team with people with different backgrounds from the company who don't know you, so they can be honest. Yes, and you need to do a lot of homework. It's like the third party who is doing this. To identify your leadership style. There was democratic, autocratic, and so on. And then depending on business cases, and we did a lot of charts, you ideally need to learn how to move from one style to another. And what helps you is the week spent in stressful conditions with these people who are giving you honest feedback, and you are not allowed to talk while they're giving the feedback. Answering your question, it should happen naturally. It's like the learning curve, and the feedback of the people initially your team on the training, and later you need to be open to the feedback of your team, and there are a lot of reviews, but the target is to move naturally between the styles.
It sounds from the way you're talking as though that was a really useful week, and you've had
Yes.
some time since then to evaluate it and think about it.
Yes.
That's why I said intuition is very important, that you're empathic enough to sense the moment. You have to sense the moment. Is that the moment for decisive leadership, or is it a moment for more empathic, democratic leadership based on who is on the other side and what is the magnitude of the decision that you're making? Because if it's something super small and, don't shoot all your bullets for something small, right?
I guess that's why it's a 1 week training, so you get time to, absorb it all.
It needs to sink in.
Yeah.
That's true.
Amelia, and then
Yes.
Marianne.
Yes, I mean, we all of us had more or less some sort of similar situational leadership trainings, but there are some recommendations and some rules, because when we think about situational leadership and all these examples are maybe based on a team, but in most of the cases, it's not about just decisions that we make among 5 or 10 or 2,000 people. It's also about how we interact with each one of our colleagues, every person in our team. And in that case, there are some recommendations and some sort of rules until it becomes natural, because not everyone has the natural leadership styles in its hands, right? You need to develop. Some have to work harder than others. We do know that if there is a person who is junior in the profession, or even junior in the company, maybe you need to be more instructive. And then when you have more senior people, that you need to allow them more space, and you can be more, should I say, democratic. So there are also these recommendations that are useful and handful of those that we can implement. So I just wanted to say that as well. It's different if you make a decision for a group, and it's different if you make a decision and discussion on one-to-one, how you handle the situation.
Marianne.
Yeah, so I was just going to respond also to Lily. I completely agree with her, as well as with Nadia. Basically, just assessing the situation, using your expertise, your experience, your intuition, your instinct, and basically with all that combined, whatever the situation needs is how you apply the different style at that moment. And I think that's exactly what makes a great leader, right? To have a fast sort of assessment, understanding what the situation, the team requires for you to act accordingly.
And that's where we leave today's discussion. Swishoes is an attempt, possibly misguided, to collect thoughtful views on questions that have no single correct answer. It won't solve your problems, and certainly not the world's, but it might offer useful and entertaining insights. It is for those who know that answers are rarely neat and never tidy, and suspect that another's perspective may be worth hearing. If you're a confident champion of efficiency and best practice, there's little for you here.